Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the THE Student. We have a very exciting university with us today. That will be the University of West Indies, and they'll be talking to us about their webinar, which is Navigating the SDGs, Progress, Challenges and Pathways to Action. So firstly, we have a video presentation that I'd like to introduce. The video features remarks from the UWI Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, and the CEO of the International School for Development Justice, Sandra Maynard, offering an overview of the Global Online Business School and its mission. So I'm going to play the video, and just before I do, just to make everyone aware, if you have any questions during the session, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom today. So let me just share this video with you.
This is our latest initiative in the area of globalization. This is a One UWI initiative, managed and owned by all of UWI, an inter-campus initiative, an intercollegial, interfaculty project that brings global partnerships to bear on its mission. UWI, our beloved university, must be a global university because we, the people of the Caribbean, we are a global people. We have been an international people from the very outset of modernity. And therefore, our vision of the world is that while we strengthen our domestic, national, and regional footing, that we must hold our heads up high into the world, because that is where we intend to function at our finest. Within our strategic plan, we set out that the University of the West Indies ought to go global and to do so aggressively. We had reached that level of maturity as an institution in teaching and learning and advocacy in order to take this historic and heroic step into the future. We have done enough over the decades to be confident that we can enter the global world and we can hold our own. We believe that this is the moment, with the full support of the IDB, who have agreed to partner with us in the development of this capacity.
As a globally engaged university and higher education leader for advancing the SDGs, agencies across all sectors find themselves at the UWI's doorstep for its regional and global expertise. We're excited to leverage these partnerships to offer ISDJ students learning and career opportunities that will profoundly shape their future.
This is a new dawning for our UWI.
Also, we have an introduction from the PVC, Sandra Maynard. Just while I get that video ready, I will just do a little introduction on Sandra. The Pro-Vice-Chancellor is a qualified barrister at law and has practiced both privately and for the United Kingdom's Crown Prosecution Service. She has held national and global senior leadership and management roles across the sectors of law, business, and academia. She has also managed multidisciplinary and functional teams through globally disruptive changes. She will be here to answer any questions related to admissions later on the call.
Hello everyone. As President and CEO, it is a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar today called Navigating the Sustainable Development Goals. Progress, Challenges and Pathways to Action. Hosted by the International School for Development Justice here at the University of the West Indies. I want to start by saying this isn't just another session about the SDGs. It is a chance for all of us, wherever we are, and whatever our personal circumstances are and our professional journeys, we are here to reflect on the kind of future that we want to build. A future where justice, equity, and sustainability aren't just ideas, but the realities that we actively want to shape. The Sustainable Development Goals gives us a shared direction, a framework, as you could call it, for tackling some of the most urgent issues of our time, such as poverty, inequality, climate change, and education, and more. But as we know, the road to the 2030 goals isn't an easy one. Progress is happening, yes, but so are the setbacks. And that means that we can't be passive. We have to be intentional and we have to be bold. At the International School for Development Justice, we believe development must be rooted in justice. That's our foundation. And it is why we focus on empowering people like you, leaders, learners, professionals with educational skills and a perspective to create meaningful change. So today, as you listen to our panel of experts, I encourage you to think about your own role in this movement. What do the SDGs mean to you in your context, in your work context, in your home life? What is one area that you can make a difference? We are glad you've chosen to spend this time with us, and we hope that it sparks something. Whatever it is, a new idea, a deeper commitment, or even a decision to pursue further study with us here at the International School for Development Justice. Thank you again for being here, and let's dive in.
So before we begin, I would like to give a warm welcome as well as our lovely Pro Vice-Chancellor, Sandra Maynard, to our moderator, Dr. Arlene Bailey, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies, the UWI Mona, and has served as the Associate Dean for the Research in the Faculty of Social Sciences. Her research and teaching focuses on the design and assessment of initiatives to support sustainable development and community informatics. So without further ado, here's Arlene.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our host, Amelia Ujedzki, and to Times Higher Education for the warm welcome. I would also like to add a special welcome and thanks to everyone for participating, and thanks to the organizers, THE and the UE team, the Vice-Chancellor, Pro Vice-Chancellor Maynard, Pro Vice-Chancellor Henry Lee, and Dr. Rhonda Jaipal Ogaro for this seminar. So as we've been seeing and hearing, the University of the West Indies, UE, is the Caribbean's leading higher education institution, boasting 5 campuses across the Caribbean and global partnerships such as the ISDJ with IDB Invest and the partners mentioned with universities worldwide. In 2024, we proudly launched the International School for Development Justice, the first global business school dedicated solely to online graduate programs focused on the acceleration towards attaining the SDGs. The UE has consistently ranked among the best institutions globally, reflecting our commitment to excellence in education. The UE is also an institution that is deeply engaged with the SDGs through its research, outreach, and practice. So today, we're here to explore the intricate landscape of the Sustainable Development Goals, a universal call to action aiming to eradicate poverty, protect our planet, and ensure prosperity for all by 2030. As we've noted, while we've made significant strides, many challenges persist. We're currently in the mid-decade of action for the SDGs. And as we navigate toward the goals supported by the Pact for the Future, which will be beyond 2030, this engaging THE UWI webinar will highlight those issues, presenting pathways for impactful action aligned with our dedication to advancing development justice through education. Today's session will feature esteemed experts from our institution, each sharing their insights on critical topics related to the SDGs, including sustainable cities, climate action, public health, gender equality, and sustainable finance. The wealth of knowledge of our esteemed UE experts will offer valuable perspectives on pressing questions and innovative solutions in our rapidly changing world. And we look forward, thank you again to all participating, and we look forward to your engagement with the webinar and engagement with ISDJ and the course offerings as we go forward. So we will now introduce our distinguished presenters, each of whom will share their insights in a brief 5-minute presentation. Professor Anthony Clayton, who will be speaking on sustainable cities, is Emeritus Professor of Caribbean Sustainable Development at the UE, Visiting Professor at the Center for Environmental Strategy at the University of Surrey, Fellow of the Caribbean Academy of Sciences, and Fellow of the World Academy of Sciences. Yes, he served as Principal Investigator of the project that built the first net zero energy plus energy building in the Caribbean, and has led projects on designing the next generation of Caribbean cities. His areas of expertise are future studies, cities, citizen security, energy, and the future of work. And so we welcome Prof. Clayton. Prof. Michael Taylor will be speaking on climate issues. And Prof. Taylor is the Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology, the UE Mona campus. His areas of specialization include environmental physics, Caribbean climate variability, climatology, and climate change. And we welcome Prof. Taylor and Dr. Heather Harewood, who will be speaking on health. Dr. Heather Harewood coordinates the Masters in Public Health and the UE PAHO Health Policy and Health Systems postgraduate programs. Her health systems and policy research focus reflect over 20 years of clinical and public health experience. Collaborations include the HEU Center for Health Economics and the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change as part of a SIDS regional team. Welcome, Dr. Harewood. Dr. Halima Deshong will be speaking on gender issues. And Dr. Deshong is University Director, Institute for Gender and Development Studies, the UE Regional Headquarters. She is an experienced feminist researcher, published in the areas of gender and gender-based violence, feminist methodologies, anti-colonial feminisms, qualitative interviewing, and analysis. Welcome, Dr. Deshong. And Dr. Priya Mohan will be speaking on sustainable finance. Dr. Mohan is a Caribbean scholar and senior fellow at SALISES, UE St. Augustine. Her research is interdisciplinary and spans a wide range of topics, including climate vulnerability and resilience, climate finance, disaster risk management, and knowledge economies, also driving innovative solutions for the Caribbean's complex development challenges. So we're looking forward to hearing from our presenters, and we encourage everyone to engage actively. As mentioned, feel free to submit your questions through the chat function, and we will have a dedicated question and answer session after all the presentations. So we welcome our first presenter, Professor Anthony Clayton, who will discuss sustainable cities. And in a 5-minute presentation, Prof. Clayton will look at what are the key strategies cities can implement to become more sustainable and meet SDG targets. So welcome, Prof, and please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arlene. Just give me 1 second here because I need to start sharing my screen. All right, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can see it.
Okay, very good. Okay, let's go through this quickly because we don't have very long. This is by way of deep background. By the time we get to 2050, it's projected that demographic growth, a combination of demographic growth and internal migration from rural into urban areas, is going to add about another 2.5 billion people to urban populations around the world. Now, if you actually do the math on this, that means we're going to need the equivalent of a little over 100 new cities, each with over 20 million inhabitants, which is about the size of Mexico City today, which is a lot. And that will drive an enormous increase in total material consumption by cities. In 2010, the world's cities consumed about 40 billion tons of material, mostly steel and cement. By the time we get to 2050, that will be up to about 90 billion tons a year, which has enormous implications for the energy demand required to produce that steel and cement. Of course, there are many other issues which are going to present challenges over the intervening years. One of them being that we're going to have to generate about 60% more food globally. And the reason why that might be a challenge is because by that time, most of humanity will, as a result of climate change, be living in areas which are water stressed. However, I don't want to sound doom and gloom about this. These are serious problems, but they're solvable problems. And we can identify directions of change. One of them is we have to have a very significant increase in the efficiency with which we do pretty much everything: build houses, produce food, manage water and waste, manage our transport systems, and so forth. And we have to decarbonize the economy, which really means getting the energy from zero or low carbon sources and using it more efficiently. Now, on the current trajectory, especially given the very aggressive expansion of coal-fired generating capacity by the People's Republic of China, which now generates about 27% of all the world's emissions of carbon. And President Trump's also equally aggressive desire to switch resources back into hydrocarbons. We may actually be, we have unfortunately quite a plausible future outcome that we will not, in fact, be able to arrest the rate of climate change until we maybe go past 3 degrees average surface temperature rise above the pre-industrial level. At that point, we are looking at the partial loss of somewhere close to 600 cities around the world, which is going to be very costly, obviously, because we're going to be losing a lot of infrastructure. About $1 trillion a year by 2050 as we lose ground to rising seas. But on top of that, we may have to be relocating about 1.5 billion people out of areas that will become flood prone. And we can start to map this in terms of where are the where are going to be the greatest financial losses and where will be the largest number of people at risk. Now, if you remember a moment ago, I said that as a result of demographic change and urban migration, we were expecting to see urban populations grow by about 2.5 billion. If we now add the number who are going to have to be relocating onto areas that are either flood prone or simply too hot to be habitable, we're probably talking about an additional 1.4 billion people, which means that we have to be thinking over the next 20-25 years of building new homes for close to 4 billion people, about half of which will be in Asia, a quarter in Africa, and about 25% distributed around the West. But let's look at this in a slightly more positive way. Cities occupy about 2% of the world's land surface, but they generate about 70% of the world's GDP. They also consume about 60% of the world's energy and produce about 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions and about 70% of total flows of global waste. Which means that if we can think of ways to actually solve these problems with better urban design, we could solve many problems at the same time. So let's look at ways that we could actually do this. This is actually not new. These houses that you see here are in Freiburg, Germany. They were built back in 2008. The average house in Germany consumes about 3,000 kilowatts a year. Each of these units, because it's designed to be energy efficient and has a large solar roof, is actually net exporting twice that. In effect, each house is supplying itself and one other house. And it has the rather pleasant side effect that instead of paying for your electricity bill every month, you actually get a check from the power utility every month. In other words, your housing stock actually starts to substitute for your power stations. And you can then think about closing down some of your power stations. This one is in the United States. This is in Seattle. A building of this size uses about 1 million kilowatt hours of power a year. This building, because it's energy efficient, uses about a quarter of that. And the power that it's a residual power demand is actually met by its solar roof. Now, if we could somehow magically make every building in the world operate on this kind of basis, we could reduce world energy demand by about a third, at which point we're making a very, very substantial progress towards addressing our problems with climate change. And this is ours. This was the first net zero energy, it's actually Energy Plus building in the Caribbean, which we built on the UWI Mono campus. But the next stage is going to be about much more than just energy. You're going to be looking at buildings like this, and this is still an early concept, where you're integrating energy generation plus water management, plus food production, plus air quality control into buildings. So a lot of the problems are going to be solved with better building design. Now, the cost you may think would be absolutely prohibitive, but that's not necessarily the case. This was the first 3D printed concrete house in Sweden, and this took 48 hours to assemble with significantly lower labor cost. So if we can start to put up decent housing units like this, greatly reduced cost, then we can start to see how we can meet the additional building requirement that we were talking about earlier. And this is a simpler model. This was in the US. This one cost $10,000 and took 48 hours to complete. And the goal of the company that built this one is to halve the cost and halve the build time. Again, this is using additive manufacturing, 3D printing. So potentially now we can see how we could be putting up a lot of new buildings, relocating people out of vulnerable areas and actually reducing our energy and resource costs while so doing. Adjusting to sea level rise is actually potentially feasible too. This is in Amsterdam, and each one of these is a prefabricated 3-story townhouse. They're sitting on a concrete hull which floats, and they slide up and down on steel poles. So when you are, this enables your building itself to respond to storm surge and flooding. And there are other examples built in both Holland and the UK. These will rise nearly 3 meters if they have to. Has the side effect that you can park your boat alongside. So there are options. The big question is, as always, will we act fast enough? And here's a way that we can represent this schematically. And we've got, and this is why we should really never try to predict a single future outcome, because it depends. It depends on policy decisions that we're going to make in the intervening period. And much will depend on whether the rate of climate change is faster than the rate of technological advance and substitution. Because we're going to go through a U-shaped transitional period during which the chances of catastrophic outcomes will increase, but then will start to decrease again as we make a transition to more compact energy and resource efficient cities, running predominantly on low carbon and renewable energy, with net zero energy plus vehicles, buildings and autonomous vehicles. If, on the other hand, we fail to implement these new technologies fast enough, and we continue to see the projected increase in greenhouse gases, then we are looking at a future with a number of potentially catastrophic outcomes. Under some of the catastrophic scenarios, we could see large-scale forced migration, with potentially as much as a quarter of the Earth's surface becoming less and less habitable due to extreme temperatures. So we're looking at a future with two highly divergent outcomes. Which one we get depends very much on the quality of decision-making over the next 20 years or so. Thank you very much indeed for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Prof. Clayton, for sharing the overview of sustainable cities, urban design, and the challenges and solutions. We look forward to sharing further in the question and answer and through the collaboration and the courses as well with participants for the ISDG. So our next presenter is Prof. Michael Taylor, and Prof. Taylor will be looking at how can nations better align their climate policies with the SDGs to ensure effective action against climate change. Prof. Taylor, welcome again.
Okay, thank you very much. Forgive me that I'm changing a little bit slightly. I hope you're seeing my screen, which is a blank screen at the moment. But I'm changing a little bit what I would like to share with you this morning or afternoon or wherever you are. Today, I really want to look at what I call reading the IPCC science through a SIDS lens. And the truth is that we have had 7 IPCC reports from representing a vast amount of scientific information about climate change. And when these reports are read through the lens of a small island developing states, and I'm using that lens because that's my lens, the lens of the Caribbean, and it is the lens of places that are extremely vulnerable to climate, then I think the IPCC reports no longer are just reports capturing abstract projections, but rather they show clear challenges to the SIDS lived reality with profound implications. And I just want to quickly illustrate what I mean in my 5 minutes. So let me go quickly. I think, for example, when you take the IPCC's Working Group 1 report, which looks on the science of climate change, it confirms in unambiguous ways that extreme weather events, unprecedented in the observed record, are increasing and will continue to increase in frequency and its severity, driven by human-induced climate change. What do I mean? A world with more never before seen intense hurricanes, floods, droughts, heat waves, and rising sea levels. What would that mean for SIDS? That means for SIDS living in a new era of increased unplanned disruptions, an era where you have the need to repeatedly recover from multiple climate-induced disasters, and an era where resources are constantly having to be reallocated from long-term investment to short-term recovery. Hope you see what I'm saying, because what I'm arguing is that when you read IPCC science such as this through the lens of SIDS, I am really arguing that it becomes the science of the unprecedented becoming more and more inescapable. And for SIDS, that represents the challenge of their development pathways constantly being disrupted. This, I'm suggesting, is a methodology for reading IPCC science through the lens of SIDS. So let me quickly continue and just read a few more things in the IPCC science, bearing in mind I only have 5 minutes. If you read the IPCC science reports, which focus on the natural and human impacts from climate change, so those would be things like Working Group 2, they make clear that there are populations of disproportionately higher risk, that are at disproportionately higher risk of adverse consequences from continued global warming. These would include like indigenous peoples, communities dependent on agriculture and coastal livelihoods, least developed countries, and of course, small islands. The reports then go on to say that the inequitable burden that these already disadvantaged populations share will only increase with every further degree of global warming. What this means for SIDS is now entering into a new era, or living in a new era, where inequities due to climate are becoming more and more entrenched. So put it another way, it means SIDS living in an era where there is increasing risk of entrenching poverty cycles, eroding social cohesion, and undermine the societal benefits that really should derive from development. So IPCC science, I'm arguing, read through the lens of SIDS is, yes, the science of the unprecedented becoming more and more inescapable, but is also the science of inequities becoming more and more entrenched, which represents for SIDS the challenge of development benefits consistently being denied. Very quickly, thirdly, you can't miss when you read the IPCC reports that they make clear that climate and non-climatic risks will also increasingly interact. And they're going to create compound and cascading risks that are complex and difficult to manage. So what I'm suggesting is that things like disruption from extreme weather events, which are already causing risks, those risks are going to ripple through important sectors for SIDS like agriculture, tourism, water resources, health, and of course, coastal infrastructure, all crucial for economic survival. And then there are also going to be non-economic damages, such as the loss of culture, biodiversity, and heritage. What this means for SIDS is that we are now and will continue to live in an era where long-term development and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals are being inhibited. Put it another way, I argue that when IPCC science is read through the lens of SIDS, it is also the science of aspirations that are becoming more and more unlikely. And for SIDS, the challenge then is of development goals being unfairly delayed. And lastly, when you read the IPCC reports, and I think you heard it in Prof. Clayton's presentation, they also stress that there's really a narrow window for limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. And therefore, there's a need for action now to achieve deep emissions reductions and enable adaptation. This means for SIDS living in an era where developing and implementing resilient strategies to safeguard livelihoods and ecosystems are now not just integral, but they are essential and they are needed at the present if the SIDS way of life is to be preserved. This would include things like early warning systems, climate smart agriculture, new ways to look on our sector processes, clean energy systems, resilient infrastructure, adaptation, financing, and compensation mechanisms. Or put another way, when IPCC science is read through the lens of SIDS, it's yes, the science of the unprecedented becoming more inescapable. Yes, the science of inequities becoming more entrenched. Yes, the science of aspirations becoming more and more unlikely. But it's also the science of the urgent becoming more and more immediate. That represents for a big challenge for SIDS, how to make development options which we consider for the future, which have now turned into the development demands of today. So in conclusion, I'm laying a context and I'm saying, listen, when we read the IPCC reports through the lens of SIDS, they are more than just historical graphs and future projections. Rather, they are an insight into the challenge of climate change for regions like ours. It's simply, and you can see it, a development challenge, for it is disrupted pathways, it's denied benefits, it's delayed goals, and it's a demand for transformative development options. When read through the eyes of SIDS, those IPCC reports are a call for action. We can discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Taylor, for highlighting the call for action and the pathways, the progress, the challenges, and the implications for achieving the SDGs. And we look forward to discussing further, especially the areas related to the unprecedented and urgent areas. So thank you. And we now welcome Dr. Heather Harewood, who will be speaking on health issues and looking at the question of What public health initiatives have shown the most promise in advancing the SDGs, especially in underserved communities? So welcome, and over to you, Dr.
Yes.
Harewood.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity to share a bit about public health and to look at this from the context of working within underserved communities and achieving the goals, the SDG goals. And I just want to set the context by saying that public health at the very basic level can be considered as the collective actions of society. So society has to get involved, and you're looking at methods and initiatives to promote the health and well-being of populations. And if we are looking in the context or the lens of the underserved communities, I think the underlying principle that needs to be seen as a thread running through some of these initiatives is the ability to achieve equitable distribution of health services and products so that people have the opportunity to optimize their health and their well-being, and from the perspective of sustainable development, thinking of what will be available for future generations. So we see health and public health as a resource for life. So we see health as not just the absence of disease. We think of the broader context, and some of which have been mentioned. We looked at city where people live. So we look at the determinants of health, the conditions into which you live and which you will bring children into the world and so forth. So in terms of the areas for development, I just want to focus on three broad areas. I want to look at infectious diseases. I want to look at non-communicable diseases, and then spend a bit looking at the health system in and of itself. And just to make the point that if we look at sustainable development goal number 3, which says good health and well-being for everyone, and we want to think about what are some simple things but important things, because it's often what we might consider basic interventions that have been very useful for, I would say, leveling up those who might be in underserved areas. So things like access to clean water. And this also overlaps with SDG number 6, which speaks about clean water and sanitation. So at a minimum, having clean water and sanitation and programs to improve the availability of water, safe water. We speak about potable water, which does not have any, minerals or infectious organisms within it, and which would be pleasant to the taste and aesthetically pleasing. But we know for some people, safe water, that is also fine. And that has been an initiative that was really important. If we look across the various settings, we're having access to clean water, remove the likelihood of infectious diseases, so we can see reductions, for example, in infant mortality, reductions in under 5 mortality because of the access to clean water, which reduce the amount of diarrheal disease impact, for example, or respiratory disease impact within communities. And to corroborate the importance of infectious disease initiatives, I think we need to give great credence to the immunization program. So if we bring it a little bit closer to our region, the expanded program on immunization, and this is something that the Caribbean actually led the world in, we were able to roll out programs to reduce vaccine preventable diseases, measles, mumps, whooping cough, things that sometimes people do not take very seriously now because the levels are so low. But we do know that there is a need for increased focus on keeping the vaccine preventable diseases at bay, because outbreaks have been occurring in other parts of the world where the vaccine levels have not been high. And this is an initiative that is relatively low cost, because governments have invested, and I think I will bring in here the whole idea of sustainable financing and what the role of government is in making certain products available to the population. So in many countries in our region, governments have taken the responsibility to make vaccines available free at the point of delivery for the population, and this has also contributed to the vast reduction we have seen in the infant mortality rate, the under 5 mortality rate, and so forth. And certainly when we think about climate change and the threats to public health, we must bear in mind the vector-borne diseases, in particular for our region, dengue, but we know in other parts of the world, which are also underserved areas, you can see malaria being the predominant mosquito-borne vaccine, vector-borne disease. And again, initiatives such as fogging, such as environmental management, these are some of the things that have been rolled out. And there's also work being done now to develop vaccines for dengue to ameliorate the impact on our society, because even if people do not die from diseases, the sort of disability and malaise that can follow some of the vector-borne diseases, in particular chikungunya, for example, can actually have an impact on productivity. And this ultimately does limit our ability to achieve our development and our productivity as small island developing states or other areas that are underserved. With respect to the non-communicable diseases, some of the initiatives that have been rolled out have been quite simple, but again, effective in terms of reaching people who might not have a lot of resources. So for example, within the region, the Port of Spain Declaration, which looked at governments coming together to work with civil society. So if we embed our initiatives within the community, that actually reduces some of the burden on government, but importantly, it achieves public health goal, which means society, all levels of society acting together. So simple initiatives such as the Caribbean Moves initiative. So we have Barbados Moves, Jamaica Moves, encouraging people to get active, increasing physical activity, but it also incorporates sessions that increase people's awareness of NCDs, diabetes, cancer, hypertension, and how these risks can be ameliorated. And the final thing I want to say within the about 5 minutes or so that I'm going to give this summary, I just want to look at health systems, and initiatives that have been important have been related to the whole concept of universal health coverage. And these have been initiatives related to how governments can actually look at sustainably financing the delivery of healthcare, and particularly countries which have bought into the primary healthcare approach, where governments take the responsibility for providing good quality care that is accessible to everybody, that is affordable, that is available, but it also importantly does not result in financial ruin, because we recognize that in many countries, especially underserved communities, accessing healthcare can actually be catastrophic for them in terms of finances. So government's initiatives to look at ways of increasing the amount of the GDP, for example, that is allocated to health, looking at being more efficient in collecting taxes, looking at imposing what we call sin taxes or taxes on foods or beverages that might be unhealthy as a way to generate funds which can then be put back into the healthcare sector. These are just some of the ways in which governments have gone about trying to achieve the goals of universal health coverage. And this is, as I said, a method for people who really do not have the wherewithal to be able to access healthcare. And we're not just speaking about curative care, we're speaking about the entire gamut, including health promotion and including opportunities to help improve general well-being, because it is not just the absence of disease, but we want people to be productive. We want people to have spiritual health, economic health, and so forth. And we do believe that the healthier the workforce is, the more productivity, as that in turn feeds back into a cycle where health can be improved. We saw examples where having low GDP, puts us at increased risk for unplanned urbanization and other negative implications on health. So I do think the move towards universal health coverage has been a very important strategy, and it is something that we want to embrace, and we can discuss further in the Q&A. So I'll wrap up here, and thank you for the opportunity for sharing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harewood, for sharing and highlighting the insights in relation to the NCD's infectious diseases universal health coverage, and we look forward to discussing further. It also highlights some of the synergies among the SDGs and the research and teaching at the UWI and some of the programs that we will be looking at and exploring with the ISDJ. So we look forward to discussing further and reminding participants to share questions and answers as we go forward. So we now welcome again Dr. Halima Deschamps, who will be looking at gender issues. And we look forward to Dr. Deschamps looking at the question, in what ways can gender equality initiatives drive progress towards achieving the SDGs? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bailey, and thank you for this opportunity for inviting us from the Institute for Gender and Development Studies to be part of this conversation on the SDGs and the International School for Development Justice. I wanted to start off by reminding those present about the important role of the Gender Equality Sustainable Development Goal, Goal 5, the move towards achieving gender equality, and how important it is as a cross-cutting goal when we think about the SDGs as a collective. It's critical Goal 5 of the SDGs is critical to securing justice for all across all of the goals. And it's fundamental to securing sustainability across a range of areas prioritized. And I think initiatives which seek to secure equality, equity, and justice, gender equality, equity, and justice must be intentionally pursued as a key driver of the process of these global goals that we have collectively set as member states of the United Nations. Now, even as we have seen shifts, and there's been some fundamental shift, if we take, for example, the Committee on All Forms of Discrimination, the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW Commission, the fact that that has such widespread support of the 193 UN member states, about, I think, 189 countries have in fact signed on as state parties to the CEDAW Convention, and it is probably the key gender equality framework, normative framework that we globally subscribe to. And even as we think about, we are celebrating the 30th this year, the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action. This and that again being a key gender equality platform that is globally with global goals. There still remains a lot by way of policy making, planning, and programmatic work to sort of address the kinds of void that remains when gender analysis isn't embedded in our lawmaking, in our policies, in our actions in general. And so for it's really critical for sort of resilience building, for prosperity, for sustainability, and the way in which our relationship with our planet. So presenters before me spoke, in particular, Professor Clayton and Professor Harriet spoke about the accelerated changes we have seen to our climate and the risk for us living in small island developing states globally, but also the risk in general as we see major shifts to our planet. But the effects are not all the same. They're not all experienced the same. And the ways in which societies are stratified, with gender being a key organizing way of which our societies are sort of developed, how they develop or how they don't develop, it becomes really important for us to think about this. And so gender analysis is also critical for us to think about the ways in which these things matter geographically, in terms of where we live on this planet, how they matter historically, the kind of histories embedded, and our social realities. And for us living on islands, it is an existential question for us. And these things matter when we see major events. So our analysis of our political economies, of our climate, of our the various ways in which societies continue to be stratified must be informed by gender. And so that's the kind of training we do in gender studies. And I wish to kind of identify and focus on 3 critical and cross-cutting areas to illustrate the importance of gender responsive action and planning for securing sustainable and the wider futures we imagine. And I'm going to use the examples rather than providing a definition of gender that we might use in the classroom, because the examples, I think, make the point. And the 3 areas I want to kind of focus on are climate change and climate justice, unpaid labor and care, and gender and sexual violence. And so we know that hurricanes has been affecting us, for example, in the Caribbean, and I use examples from the Caribbean to make the point, with greater intensity and frequency in the past several decades. And so climate adaptation and resilient work must prioritize the ways in which difference and inequality intersect in people's lives, particularly those most likely to be made marginal in relation to gender, race, disability, geographies, and socioeconomic conditions. And for us at the University of the West Indies, it's really important for us to do gender analysis informed by the ways in which gender intersects with other relations of difference and power. So we think about how gender operates in connection with race. For us in the Caribbean, this is very critical because of our history of colonization and race being a key organizing feature of how we experience life in the region. This is also true elsewhere. It's just that it manifests very differently. So, for example, women in the Caribbean organizing to mitigate the effects of climate change, those working at the front lines, those working in communities where livelihoods and lives are most likely to be encumbered in the face of climate change, report the ways in which, for example, marine degradation, food and water insecurity affect them. For example, we think about the ways in which care and unpaid labor women are more likely and girls are more likely to be engaged in care and unpaid labor. Somewhere globally, the figures are between 2 times and 10 times more than men. What does this mean for how women then are able to respond in the face of extreme weather events? We know women are most likely to be the ones who go to shelters, to be displaced, but they're also most likely to be engaged in care. We also know that men are more likely to stay at home in the face of some of these weather events and place themselves at risk in situations where it is not safe for them to be at home. And they are more likely to be engaged in the sort of more labor-intensive rebuilding work, even as women are there organizing around providing relief in greater numbers. So these gendered ways in which the effects of extreme weather events and climate-related events such as floods and droughts matter. It matters that we have a gender analysis when thinking about this. And an example of this, some reports that were produced as part of an Engender project in the Caribbean, we learned that for women in agriculture and fisheries, for example, they are more likely to take longer to recover in the face of these extreme weather events, even though most of the programming around recovery are targeted at those who are engaged at the higher echelons of the agriculture, how agriculture is organized, and those are more likely to be men. So planning with a gendered understanding of social stratification becomes really critical in times of crisis. I mentioned unpaid labor and care. We know that unpaid labor and care continues to underwrite economies globally. And with this, we must understand that what might this mean if that care and unpaid labor isn't counted? What does it mean in economies globally when it's not counted? It means that when we are doing economic measures, we do not account for the additional burden of care and unpaid labor that is most likely to be carried by women and girls, and what this means for their participation in labor markets. And I'll just end by saying one of the most egregious effects of gender inequality is the fact that women are most likely to experience sexual and gender-based violence. And these numbers, unfortunately, are not going down globally. So our actions are really, it's necessary for women and girls to be able to participate as full citizens. And so the kind of analysis that we do around gender becomes really critical in terms of planning, programming, and at the programmatic letter. And really happy to take questions in the question and answer section. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deshank, and for sharing the cross-cutting, critical nature of gender equality and its relationship to the SDGs and highlighting the examples. And we look forward to discussing further and looking at the solutions for both regionally and globally. So thank you. We welcome Dr. Priya Mohan, who will be looking at sustainable finance and exploring the question of what is the impact of the SDGs on business, including areas related to sustainable finance. Dr. Mohan, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this very dynamic panel today. So the SDGs, particularly SDG 13, climate action, have dramatically shifted the way people do business and the climate finance landscape, the finance landscape in general. So today we have investors, consumers, and regulators demanding more than just profits from business. We have persons asking, how is your business addressing sustainable development challenges? How is your business addressing climate change? How is your business addressing inequality? How is your business addressing gender, as we just heard? So now these questions are, of course, particularly relevant for us in the Caribbean and for Caribbean businesses, given that we are amongst the most vulnerable regions in the world, and the threats we face from climate change and extreme weather event and social inequality as well. So to begin the talk, I want to talk a bit about sustainable finance. Sustainable finance is no longer a niche concept. It's becoming more and more mainstream. It represents the fundamental shift in how we approach financial decision making. It broadly refers to the process of integrating environmental, social, and governance, so ESG considerations, into our investment decisions and strategies across both the public sector and the private sector. Now, this integration aims to drive increased long-term investments into sustainable economic activities and projects, fostering, a more responsible and more resilient financial system. Now, we want to incorporate environmental considerations into sustainable finance. We want to incorporate social aspects into sustainable finance, and we want to incorporate governance aspects into sustainable finance. For environmental considerations, we want to think of issues like biodiversity preservation, pollution reduction. For social aspects, we want to talk about social equity, human rights, and labor standards. For governance factors, we want to talk about ethical governance practices, transparency, and accountability. Now, when looking at sustainable finance, climate finance becomes an important issue, especially for us in the Caribbean. And climate finance is really the finance that we need to address our climate action. So how are we addressing adaptation and mitigation? How are we funding our climate action in these areas? Now, it's important that our climate finance is also equitable when addressing these challenges, as we heard about the gender issues, that we are not all affected in the same way. So it's important that this finance is also equitable. Now, I just want to get back to the main question, which is looking at the SDGs, businesses, and sustainable finance. So the SDGs really provide a blueprint for us for a better future. But how does sustainable finance play a role? Well, as I said, the SDGs are reshaping the business landscape within the area of sustainable finance. We have stakeholder expectations moving beyond profits to have, tangible commitments to the environment and social responsibility. We have an accelerating integration of ESG factors into our core business strategies, with investors and consumers demanding transparency and accountability in sustainability performance. So the SDGs are really unlocking new market opportunities for sustainable and green products and services. They're fostering research and development and innovation in eco-friendly technologies and business models. They're really enhancing the reputation of companies to prioritize sustainability. Now, within the financial sector, the SDGs are really catalyzing a surge in sustainable investments and the development of innovative financial instruments with greater emphasis on managing ESG-related risk. So we're really witnessing a paradigm shift where businesses are not only expected to generate financial returns, but contribute positively to this sustainable and equitable future that we all want. Now, I just want to be conscious of the time. So in terms of, we do face significant obstacles in the Caribbean in terms of mobilizing finance and sustainable finance in particular, and having the private sector play a role in providing this sustainable finance. So how do we go forward with having that private sector participation? So I'm going to present 3 points as to how we have that private sector participation. So the first thing we want to do is have standardized metrics that would create, that would remove uncertainty for investors, particularly those unfamiliar with our Caribbean SIDS context. So what do I mean by this? Well, how are we measuring the impact of a solar energy project on a small island nation with our unique grid challenges? This would require specialized metrics that would not be comparable to a larger economy. Also, we have universally accepted ways to assess environmental and social impacts. So how are we assessing the true cost of coastal erosion averted by, let's say, mangrove restoration projects in our region, or the social return on investment in community-based tourism activities? So how are we want to be able to compare our projects across the region to assess risk and ensure genuine sustainability. So this lack of these tailored metrics would deter our potential investors who may be wary of greenwashing and misaligned outcomes. So especially if we struggle to understand our unique operating environment as SIDS. So that's the first issue, this absence of standardized metrics, which creates the uncertainty for investors. Secondly, we want to talk about transparent reporting. So a crucial aspect of building trust is hampered by capacity constraints in our region. So for example, many SIDS struggle to collect and report consistent data on climate vulnerability, biodiversity loss, as Professor Taylor would know very well, and of course, social equity indicators, as well as Dr. Deshawn would also know. So this leads to data gaps and a lack of comparability, making it difficult again for investors to accurately assess the impact on investment. So imagine trying to compare the ESG performance of a resort in Barbados with one in Dominica, where we have very different reporting standards and data availability. This difficulty discourages investment and impedes our ability to track our progress on the SDG. So transparent reporting and the metrics become very important. And finally, my last point is the development of a robust regulatory framework. If we want to unlock that private sector sustainable finance, it's essential for us to create a level playing field. So we need clear and consistent regulations like taxonomies on sustainable activities tailored to the region's unique ecosystem. So we're talking about our coral reef preservation, sustainable fisheries. We want disclosure requirements. We want enforcement mechanisms to guide our investors to prevent, market failure, market manipulation. We, however, have limited regulatory capacity and resources in which to balance our environmental protection with our economic development. And this could lead to delays and inconsistencies. So this is particularly concerning when we're considering the vulnerability of our region to external shocks like hurricanes, where we need swift and decisive action. So without strong regulations, we may, for instance, have a surge in unsustainable tourism development, which can then damage our marine ecosystems and can impact the long-term viability of tourism itself. So without these frameworks, and sustainable finance can become fragmented, vulnerable to abuse. And this is particularly challenging for us as a region where we have limited resources and capacity to implement our metrics, our transparent reporting, and our regulatory framework. So in closing, in order to overcome these obstacles, it's important that we build a credible and effective sustainable finance ecosystem in the Caribbean. And this is where we can discuss in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohan. And we look forward to the discussion in the Q&A. And thank you for highlighting the sustainable finance and its linkages with the SDGs and the areas that we have been discussing. So we thank all of the panelists for your excellent presentations and the insights shared. And it's highlighting for this THE UWI seminar, it's highlighting the research, teaching, and outreach of the UWI and the ISDJ. And so we look forward to participants engaging with us further. We are going into Q&A, and so please share or indicate if you would like to share a question. Our first question, and this we will ask all the panelists to indicate their perspectives. The first question, how can climate finance and innovative financial instruments such as blue and green bonds include more of a focus on gender and other social inequalities? So we will start with Dr. Mohan, who was looking at the issue of sustainable finance, and then move to the other panelists for their perspectives in relation to gender perspective, Dr. Deschong, and the other inequalities as discussed by Dr. Harewood, Prof. Taylor, and Prof. Clayton. Okay, so Dr. Mohan.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think it's a very broad question, and we certainly do not have time to address it. But what I can say in terms of gender and the gender issue with innovative financing instruments, you would see that a lot of the instruments and the grant financing now, they're actually mandating that gender issues be taken into consideration in order for you as a small island development state or even as an NGO to be able to access the funds. So gender is definitely an important consideration now, especially the way in which the finance is operationalized at the community level. So who benefits at the level of the community? So when we're talking about gender, we're talking about indigenous communities, we're talking about persons with disabilities, we're talking about the youth. So these projects are being built specifically around inclusion and participation, and how we can have that participation from the community. We also have gender bonds becoming quite popular in addition to the blue and green bonds. So more and more gender is playing an important role in the whole area of sustainable finance and these innovative finance instruments. I think my colleague would have much more to say here.
I'm taking cue that I should follow you, Priya. And thank you for that question. And I think, just building on what Priya said earlier, I think one of the things that we have to understand when we're addressing issues related to climate change and climate finance is any kind of intervention that is meant to either remedy, do resilience work, do adaptation work, must take as a starting point what how the society is organized, is stratified. And I know we talk about gender finance, but I think one of the things that we do, because at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, we've pursued quite a number of gender analysis related work in connection to climate. One of the things we do is that sort of social inequality, social inclusion analysis as a starting point. So even as we are doing gender analysis work, that gender analysis work takes account of the various ways in which, as Priya was mentioning, the various ways in which societies are stratified by gender, by race, by class, by ability, disability, and so on. And for us, a key form of stratification when it comes to thinking about climate work is where people are geographically located. That is fundamental. It's fundamental where they're geographically located, but where they're located in terms of the economy. So that political economy analysis becomes important. What does it mean, for example, labor market organization, and how people's livelihoods are interrupted and when they can re-engage in meaningful livelihood opportunities in the face of extreme weather events, and how are we building resilience to account for these dimensions of difference. I think as a kind of starting point, I see more, for example, work being done by various disaster management agencies globally, including in the Caribbean, where gender is being embedded more frontally. The kinds of projects we've taken on at the University of the West Indies in the IGDS does call on us as gender experts to really give a sense of how we should sort of be allocating resources and allocating priorities. So it is extremely embedded. It's really important if we think about climate finance. I think at the intergovernmental level globally, there is a keen understanding at least in the normative framework, that gender analysis must and considerations must be embedded in how funds are allocated and organized. I think I would like to see that more reflected in non-traditional areas where gender might not have been seen as necessary. So for example, in civil society organizations who are doing a lot of this work, you see more and more they're asking for sort of gender action plans to be embedded in their work. And we would like to see it more prevalent in areas of the academy where gender might not have been seen as apparent. And this happens in our collaborations across departments. So it is happening, but it needs to intensify.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohan and Dr. Deshang. Dr. Harewood, would you like to respond to this in particular, as well as we have other questions?
Sure. I would just like to add to this because a lot of what was said before, speaking about gender, finance, those sorts of things. Again, these are some of these social determinants that actually shape people's health outcomes and expectations. So I'm supporting what Halima said, in terms of having this kind of cross-cutting and interdisciplinary work and actually looking at the health implications of some of these things. Because as I was speaking about universal health coverage and the access to services, women are the ones who predominantly will access services for their children, actually, sometimes even not themselves, and even trying to level up the playing field in terms of access to funding. Because even though we do have primary health care and governments providing services free at the point of delivery, if we look across our health systems in the region, there's a staggering amount of out-of-pocket payments that occur even in our region. And this, again, has implications because mothers make decisions. Can I miss a day of work to go to the clinic and then pay for this service? Am I able to pay for this service? So I think across the different areas, even for climate impacts as well, you would have spoken about people who are displaced and so forth, but then the health needs that come from there do disproportionately impact women. So I think we can look more on this as well as the implication for livelihoods. And it is not just climate. We can think about other health shocks if we can introduce that as well. Because in the wake of COVID-19, for example, if we look at the people who lost their jobs, predominantly there were women who were in the tourism and other service sectors. So sometimes when we have these external shocks, we do see disproportionate implications for those who are in the lower socioeconomic groupings, but we can also see a gender disparity as well. So I think that there is definitely scope for integrating these areas, looking at health across all the regions, across the various spectra, not just the absence of disease, but mental health. And if we get an opportunity, maybe that's something that we can explore a little bit more because we do see gender differences. And we need to look at how services are developed to address the needs of men versus women, younger versus older persons, and there's emerging work looking at a particular group that has maybe been underserved in the sense that we have this concept of emerging adults, people between 18 and 29 who are legally adult, but who are still going through life changes and might not be supported as well in the system. And they may be the ones who are predominantly affected again by job losses due to catastrophic events, whether weather related or whether infectious diseases. So these are some of the things that we need to focus on in terms of building out our initiatives to cut across these very important areas and to bring more holistic results, I would say. So thanks for that.
Thanks very much, Dr. Harewood. And so we will ask a question in relation to some of the key areas needed for the implementation of the SDGs towards 2030 and beyond. Particularly in the developing regions, Global South, and which SDGs are most at risk. So we'll ask the panel, and we'll start with Prof. Clayton. Would you like to respond?
Thank you, Arlene. Is this in terms of key areas for implementation? Well, with regards to the built environment, I think that we have to take most of the responsibility for adaptation ourselves. And it is very clear that we are now talking about adaptation. We're no longer talking about preventing climate change. Now, what this means is that we have to start to think about our areas of human settlement and our transport infrastructure in particular. Most of the airports in the region are at or close to sea level, and some of that infrastructure is going to become vulnerable in the years ahead. So we have to think about relocating some of our key transport infrastructure. Even more important, we have to start thinking about relocating our centers of population. Now, although it is absolutely true that the small island states are particularly vulnerable, mainly because our centers of population, transport infrastructure, and areas of economic activity tend to be located on the same coastal plains. And you could therefore have a single severe weather event which would impact on your centers of government, centers of population, centers of economic activity, and transport infrastructure simultaneously. And it's actually, we've had a couple of very near misses already. There are cases, notably, for example, the Bahamas or Cayman Islands, where a single hit from a Category 5 storm could basically take down the government and most of the economy simultaneously. However, it also has to be said that if you think about vulnerable populations globally, it is also true that close to 99% of all the people who are going to be most at risk from climate change globally live in mainland states, not in small islands. So in terms of the demand for resources, most of it will go to mainland states. Potentially something like a quarter or a third of the entire population of Bangladesh is going to have to retreat back from water's edge over the next few decades. And that's substantially more than the entire population of all the Caribbean islands combined. So I think it is unrealistic to hope for transfers of substantial resources from abroad. What we must look at doing, therefore, is starting to gradually migrate people out of the most vulnerable areas. What we're actually doing is the complete opposite. Almost every major hotel development, housing development in recent years has gone into areas that we believe will become flood prone. Now, this is absolute madness. We're actually increasing our exposure to the risk, and we're increasing the eventual economic cost and the number of lives that we're putting in harm's way. So if there's one thing we can do, I think it is actually to stop waiting for UN resolutions and stop waiting for some kindly soul elsewhere to give us large amounts of money. It is actually to change our planning laws and building codes to start to reduce the number of lives and the eventual economic cost of climate change. I don't think anybody else is going to do this for us. And the sooner we start taking responsibility for this, and this is within our purview, within our remit, then the more we will do to ensure that our countries have a viable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Clayton. Prof. Taylor, would you like to share perspectives on key areas for implementation? Thanks.
Sure. I think that's a hard question to ask because, sometimes when I do a presentation, I have a slide with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I just poll the audience, based on things that I've presented in terms of the science, which are the areas that they think are most impacted. And invariably, every Sustainable Development Goal is identified, whether it's water or health or education, sustainable cities, land above, life above water, life in water, or above ground. Interestingly, the only one that perhaps is not readily identified is climate action. But I say this to say, I think in almost every one of these Sustainable Development Goals, you can identify key actions that are needed now. Prof. Clayton just identified within especially move towards sustainable cities. We have heard it with respect to health. We have heard with respect to inequities that arise due to disparities, especially some along how gender is treated. one that perhaps cuts across all, and from my perspective, which I think is hampering some of our advancement, is simply data. Across every single one of these goals, action depends on us really capturing the data. And I'm not just talking about how hot it's going to become or how cold or how high the sea levels are going to rise, but the data to really capture, what are the gaps in the building policies, what are the number of vulnerable people in particular locations, how is the vulnerability expanding, the rate of expansion. And in truth, especially developing countries and small island developing states, not enough attention is paid to the role that capturing adequate data which defines the problem, which gives the bounds within which the challenge is occurring, which targets the solution so they are contextual, and so sometimes our solutions then become misaligned or not targeted or miss important groupings that need to be targeted. So I'm going after one that cuts across. And of course, you can link data with the ability for developing countries to do their own analysis, their own research, and not have to rely on others to do that for you. So that's where I would go along the line in answering something that cuts across every single one, and which I think would really leapfrog some of the actions and implementation needed.
Thank you so much, Prof. Taylor. And we have a comment as well. Excellent presentations. As I listened, there were many commonalities in the presentations without them being explicitly stated, which is indicative of cross-cutting nature of the goals. I think the ISDJ provides the opportunity for us to demonstrate clearly the cross-cutting nature of the work we are doing in our Caribbean region. So thank you very much, Dr. Mortley. And we will highlight here all of the insights and the suggestions, solutions that have been shared by our panelists, and reflective again of the work of UWI and the offerings at the ISDJ. And we look forward to sharing with our participants globally. So we will now move to a video highlighting ISDJ's programs, and then we will return with the closing remarks. And so we thank again, Amelia. And we have a question as well. Is it possible to receive any information on the course content for the MSc Sustainable Development and Justice? So we will share here the ISDJ website, which highlights many of the program offerings. And so we will share the link as well in response, and we look forward to further discussing with you. And Pro Vice Chancellor Maynard is responding. And okay, then we have a comment. The website is useful, and a course list for each program would be great. So thank you very much for the suggestions. and we look forward to following up. And we'll invite Pro Vice Chancellor Maynard or Pro Vice Chancellor Henry Lee if they would wish to respond further as well. Okay, so we want to thank everyone for your participation in today's session. Thank you for your engagement. We thank our participants. We look forward to further discussing with you and to welcoming you to the ISDJ's program offerings for collaboration and exploring the many courses and formats that are offered in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals as we work towards achieving the goals and beyond. For the webinar, we extend our gratitude to all the presenters for sharing their expertise and insights today. The insights related to the synergies and particular role of the SDGs and the cross-cutting nature of the goals and all that we must do in terms of working towards, given that we are mid the decade of action, 5 years to the SDGs, as well as the role of the Path for the Future in helping to attain these goals. The UWI's research, teaching, and outreach in this area has been highlighted, and the implications for collaboration and work on the SDGs in terms of leaving no one behind for the vulnerable groups in particular, and in some cases leaving no one offline in terms of the areas mentioned in relation to data and the need to support the action towards the SDGs. We hope that the webinar inspires you to continue to think critically about the SDGs and to take action within your communities and professional spheres. And we would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to our ISDJ and THE partners, to the Vice Chancellor, to Pro Vice Chancellor Maynard and Pro Vice Chancellor Henry Lee, to Dr. Rhonda Jaipal Ogaro, and to our THE partners, Emilia Ujetsky, and the Times Higher Education partners, as well as the partners of the ISDJ, IDB Invest, United Nations University, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, University of Glasgow, the University of Johannesburg, and the SUNY. We also thank, as we said, you, our attendees, and we encourage continued conversation on the learning journey. Special thanks to our presenters, to Prof. Anthony Clayton, Prof. Michael Taylor, Dr. Heather Harewood, Dr. Halima Dashong, and Dr. Priya Mohan for all of the insights shared and the very timely and relevant suggestions, solutions, and approaches to the SDGs. If you wish to revisit this insightful session, the recorded presentation will be available through THE and the ISDJ. We will share the contacts, and the ISDJ suite of offerings include master classes, short courses, graduate certificates, graduate diplomas, and master's degrees. And the initial program areas include, and those were highlighted in the video, and we will show them again on the website, include Mastering the SDGs Masterclass, Climate Studies, Gender Justice and Activism, Global Sport, Discrimination and Reparatory Justice, Public Health and Informatics, Sustainable Development and Justice, Sustainable Educational Leadership and Management, Sustainable Entrepreneurship and Innovation, Sustainability and Data Analytics, Sustainability Management. So we welcome you and we look forward to engaging with you further. And thank you everyone, and have a good continued best wishes for the day. And we see some follow-up in the email as well, in the Q&A as well. And so we will follow up further. Thank you again very much, everyone, to the teams, THE, ISDJ, presenters, and audience, and for everything. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for a great session.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
And bye, everyone.
Thanks and bye-bye.
Thanks and bye.
Bye.